Where's my where's my where's my Evernote? Where are you? Here you are.
Netplay tourneys
What
BB
happened? I was gone for like 3 days. Good enough, right? Good enough. Okay, before we start, I think H is a very iconic way of saying hello. But what I used to do, instead of doing a thumbs up emoji, I would do B. Because it's like a thumbs up, right? Look, it's like a thumbs up. Your right hand doing a thumbs up. Anyways, let's start. So, context, right? Tashi made a video commenting on the status of Netplay tournament. If you've not watched it, I'm going to summarize it for you, right? Here are basically Hotashi's points. There's too many Netplay tournaments. It's more like oversaturation of Netplay tournaments reduces the value of Netplay tournaments. This is basically his core point. Basically, my interpretation of lack of inspiration to specific players, lack of inspiration from just how many there are. Basically, lack of inspiration contributes to less steady numbers or inconsistent turnout from stronger players. I shouldn't say lack of inspiration, but also like maybe lack of stakes. A lot of the stuff here I'm about to break down, almost all of it is entirely built around the concept that for top players, these are not as beneficial for a variety of reasons, right? Like if you compare them in terms of like placings and things like that, it's not exactly bad, but we'll talk about both sides, right? So I'm gonna be very literal about what he says. In fact, I even quoted him, but I actually wrote this down so I could quote it. There's so many people don't care. That's one. Next, he mentioned low engagement. Low engagement on base or on original channel stream. Well, I've seen some people like blow him up for it. I don't really like it. I disagree heavily. Not directly in the sense of like, I agree that there are a lot of Netplay tournaments, like almost too much, and obviously I don't enter a ton of them. But I would say that a lot of the things relating to his perspective, he's focused on himself, right? Again, it's an opinion piece, so of course it's focused on how he feels. I actually want to clarify this. I don't do things like this often. I don't make like kind of like reply pieces. In fact, the last time I did it was with Max, which was also interesting. Basically, he comments on lack of, I don't want to misquote him, but to me, he basically says lack of funding or lack of interest or unaware of interest in numerous new things. This is basically a lot of his initial core, right? So oversaturation of Netplay tournaments reduces the value of Netplay tournaments. I actually disagree. When it comes to Netplay tournaments, I think from the spectator's perspective, an overwhelming amount of Netplay tournaments are actually detrimental because it's like, you know, 2 are happening one day. It's hard to keep up. And like, obviously, when you are watching a tournament, there's going to be one that's probably going to be more entertaining than the other. Oh, this tournament has more Nago, and I'm a Nago player, so I want to watch more Nago, right? This tournament doesn't have Nago. So when you start bringing in like the value of a Netplay tournament, I'm going to, specifically because of that, view it directly from the lens of a player, right? So again, like spectators, it's a lot more complicated, and it's also like a lot down to personal preference. Spectators, or like people who don't care as much about how like the fighting game goes, usually they just have like a preference for a player or a character or something of the sort, right? They have some sort of preference and they're really just looking for that. That's all they really care about. A good example is I could lose a lot of tournaments. I could lose dozens of stats, right? So many. And there's so many people that will OS for me. I remember when the first time I played Umisho in bracket, the rows of OSs in my chat for me was insane. It was absolutely insane. It's very rare when you are already like prominent enough that people are going to change their opinion of you. Most people's opinion, especially in Strive, are based on what a lot of the community talked about. So like, for example, shit on Happy Chaos. Now people really shit on Nago. People really shitting on Leo. Community outrage to that. A lot of people that don't know any better, they're just like, well, of course this dude's winning. He's playing Nago. Like, of course. Like, but that's not really a Netplay problem. That's more a product of the community. People care too much about tournaments. In fact, even the statement implies a little something, right? Nobody cares. Many people don't care about it, right? First, this doesn't matter. If you play Strive, you have to play for yourself. What a lot of people do is they lose. They're just like, oh, I lost. then they're like, oh, people are like gonna think differently of me, so they I don't know. It's like that in a lot of games. Strive Outrage is particularly bad, but it's like this is already a sign of something bad, right? What online tournaments are to me? So number one, I've talked about wanting to win, influencing your success rate, right, in casuals. I've even considered, like, maybe I want to win tournaments too much. I tend to think Netplay tournaments as more of consistent weeklies or very situational other things. He highlights Series E, right? Series E does an invitational, runs it every week, has great production, right? He kind of like highlights Series E as like as doing good, right? Series E doing good. And I agree. We agree. But I think they're great above all for practice. Here's why. One, less stressful environment, right? Playing from your house is a lot less stressful than playing offline. If you didn't have online tournaments, then it's like, oh, well, I don't have locals near me. I guess I'll have to try going to like Otaku or something like that, right? Basically, no matter what, they build a less stressful environment because you know that if you lose, there's next week, right? On top of that, momentum is a big factor. He commented on, like, you know, in weeklies, if you lose to some guy one week, you're gonna be like, oh, I gotta beat them next week, right? And that gives you something to work for, right? And have a very good baseline. Right? Let's say you lose to someone just doing like 5H Bandit Bringer, right? No, next week, you're like, well, I'm not gonna lose to just Bandit Bringer. I mean, you practice it, and then you go into the next tournament match, you may beat someone that just does Bandit Bringer all the time, right? Like, that's like a really good way of improving. It's fantastic, right? But you may notice that the more I'm talking about this, right, the more you can see kind of I'm discussing them more for beginner players or like newer. These things are fantastic for newer players because they help get a lot of like the hard part of like adjusting the things and like figuring out like, oh, this beat me, whatever. More often than not, people will get tournament sets seriously, but take casuals not so seriously with how they lose. These tournaments are still fantastic for testing things out, especially implementing things under pressure. Because of the weekly nature, it's less taxing, right? I mean, it does not take a genius to look at that. You lose at Otaku, that's a year away. You lose in a weekly, you have 1 week and you get to do it again. You know, there's a whole crowd behind you. Some people do not tolerate or cannot take like any sort of like booing at all. Some people need to have the crowd cheering for them, or they can't do shit. In online tournaments, like, you know, the guy that's like listening for the crowd, it's like, what is he doing? Check in the chat, be like, oh, this dude is nice, you know, and then you get your power up. It doesn't really work the same way. Lack of inspiration, lack of stakes contributes to less steady numbers or inconsistent turnout from stronger players. I think stakes is applicable here. I think stakes, a lot of people, if they're gonna play for like $100 or $200, like it could be like 4 to 6 hours, right? If I make third, I get like, you know, $10 or some shit. Some people like just cannot do that. Of course, like there are people who are not as, they just don't like online no matter what rollback number it is. They're just like, I just think online sucks no matter what. There's too many factors to ever name it on just the amount of online tournaments, right? Lack of inspiration or lack of stakes contributes to less steady numbers. In fact, he quotes me being on this list for like this reason. In fact, I've not played Strive for almost a month now. It's not been because I don't like the game or anything. I've just been too busy. I would have loved to enter the last run-in, but I was just way too busy. If a lot of tournaments lined up with my stream schedule, I could have just streamed Netplay tournaments, right? Or inconsistent turnout from stronger players. I think that does contribute. But again, there's so many factors as to why they don't enter. Like I know Flash always hates Netplay. Every time I see him tweet, he's like, I hate Netplay. So I mean, that's one already. There are a lot of other players, and I know Hotashi was once in that list too, of like players that just do not value Netplay tournaments as much because it's online, right? The pandemic changed a lot. When you think about inconsistent turnout from stronger players, one Netplay tournament will fix it through like, people are just like, oh, there's nothing else. I'll enter this one next week, I guess, because I'm bored. The reducing it doesn't really change it. It's less about, I think, the actual tournaments themselves, and more about the players and why they choose not to, right? I have a preference for this. Like, that's all that matters, right? Like, oh, I just have a preference for net playing online, and then offline I play in tournaments, right? Like that's quite literally what I have done for a long time. The only tournaments I entered like 2 weeklies last year. One of them was with Anji, so I mean, that should tell you a lot. But like otherwise, I only played in the Red Bull 10v10 and Big Level. Not because I don't like Netplay tournaments, but I just didn't feel like it. Before, I didn't feel like it at all. I would have never entered a Netplay tournament. Well, I've talked about this before, but if I wear my glasses, I have to wear my glasses usually if I want to play as good as I can. But if I'm streaming, I rarely do wear my glasses because, oh, actually, this is better than you tracking, but whoa. Well, maybe I can just use my glasses. Okay, wow, we leveled up. And I've noticed this as I play casuals. If I don't wear my glasses, I tend to play worse. Like if you limited every Netplay tournament for Strive except one, doesn't matter which one it was, or like even 2 or 3, like even being generous. If we could have a tournament to fit everyone's schedule, you would still not get everyone. It does not matter about the quantity. It's just the players don't want to. There's so many people that so many people don't care. We already talked about this, but I think basically this boils down to it shouldn't matter. Like, I think this is an irrelevant statement. You're thinking about it from the lens of you want to grow. It should be use Netplay tournaments if you want. Like if you are the type that likes grinding them every week. Like I know he mentioned like Rami, Nubenheimer, like they grind a lot of weeklies, SQ as well, right? But when it comes to like, you know, if I win, nobody cares, then it's like that's just bad. Again, like wins should be for yourself. If your validation is through if people care or not, then it's gonna be not great. You can use like Netplay tournaments if you're like in the situation that like let's say Hotashi refers to like for business, right? Like because obviously when you get so far you can't actually use it as a business or like a means of growth. It works, right? Like it works if you do it like that. But if you play for any reason other than those two, the latter is a bit of, I'm gonna put an asterisk there, bad. I know a lot of people who enter online tournaments and are like, oh, I know someone's watching that's going to give me a sponsorship. It doesn't really work like that. And it probably won't ever. In actuality, people basically think that 1 or 2 or 3 or even 5 wins can get you something significant in esports. And it doesn't really work that way. If your value is purely that you can win with a character, that's a bad sign. Like, if you really think about it from like a business perspective, right? It's not, it doesn't really show much if you just like win with select characters and select tournaments, right? It makes for a very dreary experience if you have that goal. Like just, I mean, not goal, obviously you can have the goal, but if it's like, I'm doing this purely so I can get the FGC money, right? It's not good. This is like an interesting topic because definitely like a lot of tournament channels that stream, like they really have pretty poor viewership unless it's like, you know, a very big event, like an offline one. Usually online ones don't really have that, right? You're going to prefer to watch your preferred player's perspective. So I think if they're streaming it, you're probably going to be going to that no matter what, right? Like it's like, why would you not, right? It's like, sometimes you want more commentary, you're going to use the original channel, right? You're more likely actually to have lower engagement if this problem was fixed, where it's like if you had more consistent turnout from stronger players, even if you narrowed the tournament down, you'd probably find that the original channel will never be able to match the like streamer perspective channels as frequently if you cultivated a community that knows to watch you for that character, right? Yeah, unless you're Yipes. But I mean, like, see, like that's the thing, right? Like Yipes like brings like great energy to any stream he's in. Commentators do too. Right, but it's just like most people know Yipes, right? Like that's the connection I'm making here. Just like from the concept of oversaturation of Netplay tournaments, I think inherently it's not true because of the lens of like you have different commentators grinding these tournaments. Like it's not just players involved. Like having multiple commentators able to practice on smaller scales, medium scales, large scales, like these things are great. Just like, you know, they're great for learning as players involved, right? That same application is relevant for players because it's like, well, is this the Netplay tournament all the good players enter? Is it like sometimes they show up or like do they never enter? Like it matters. Having the option is important. But like, of course, when you do that, you create the lens of like, oh, I'm only really interested to see like this tournament because like my friend's in it. I know the good players are here. I want to watch that. This tournament looks interesting because there's some people I don't know. There's some people I do. Stuff like that, right? But of course, inherently, you're going to have people that individually are not going to watch the other for whatever reason, like time zone, work, region, how long the tournament's gonna take, whatever. Like, it's just like there's so many factors. I think the implication of like narrowing it down, or I don't know, narrowing it down, I think doesn't really value it. From Hotashi's perspective, again, and I'm talking about this from the lens of a player, this isn't really a problem for me or him. This is like a problem for the organizer. Usually after Evo for any fighting game is usually kind of a drought. In fact, you've probably seen it even in viewership numbers if you watch like a lot of fighting game streamers. It's not like people have fallen off or anything. It's just like usually fighting games tend to fall off a little bit after Evo because there's a huge drive to like grind for Evo, grind for Evo, grind for Evo. And then when they're done, they're like, I'm fucking beat. Now, I think a lot of the problems stem from this. Basically what he says is he wants more things like interviews for the players, like, you know, maybe like better breakdowns, right? Better production value on tournaments. Matt posts that interviews sound like a cool idea. It is until you actually see it. Let's just say that. When you win, sometimes being interviewed is not the best vibe, and it's a little bit putting you on the spot. Second, if you lose and you're up for an interview,
tough loss. How do you feel after that?
How the fuck you think I feel? Don't ask no dumbass questions.
It's not good. When you put nerds on the mic, you're really playing with fire. I'm gonna put this in bold just so we can emphasize this. I'm not going to elaborate on this further. I'm just going to put that in bold in parentheses and we will move on. Though I will say I do like the idea. I think it's dicey. I think there's a lot of value in what these tournaments give to players who aren't like considered top players. I think there's a lot of value to be gained there. It's like if you care too much about other people's opinion on your capabilities as a fighting game player, you are made or broken by public perspective. Like if someone's just like blatantly transphobic on my comments, like, do you would I care, or like, is this the type of person I would even care about how they think about me? It's the same thing in like fighting games. If your identity is based on like, oh, like so many people care about how good I am or like which character I play. Yes, exactly. Why take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from? Better breakdowns. I think this is invaluable. But here's the thing. If you have ever excelled or like been a top player in fighting games, you will know when you get to a certain point, the commentators will not be able to keep up with what's happening unless it's explained to them. It's hard to tell about information if it's not given to you, right? I mean, like whether it's if you're hurt, if you hear it, or if you see it. If you don't see it or hear it, how are you gonna know? Basically, I think like better breakdowns is really hard. You have to have basically specialized people for it that really put in a lot of effort and attention. Like a lot of people watch Stage Jam and like, oh, commentary, man, funny, you know what I mean? Like, and they're just like, oh, I could do that. I don't know why I did the first part. There's no correlation to was like, oh, funny streamer guy. It's hard to find someone with enough fighting game comprehension as a player who also commentates and can articulate it. It's hard enough having the ability to articulate these things in general. Commentary is not easy. That's why Sajam basically stands out in that field. Sajam, like, obviously an extremely good player, way back before I even competed. The people that excel at commentary are just that damn good. Like, they're just fantastic. I think a lot of people as players tend to forget how much effort and skill not just comes down to recognizing what's happening, but doing it immediately in real time. Basically, I think like I would love this, but to the degree I would want it, I think unlikely. There's a lot of stuff you could add to tournaments that make it more interesting from a spectator and also as a player. Like I said, things like interviews and those breakdowns, prize pool. Like he does not mean it like this, but I interpret it as him saying basically a lack of quality, or I guess unique quality is what he's looking for. Doing it from the lens of something like Series E is not as bad, and they do a good job of it because like one, they have great production. They do a lot of really good things that I love to see. They have great commentators, right? Like, but like compared to an average online weekly, you can't compare these two. It's also a matter of like, you know, do people want to be involved in this, right? Like, do people want this? I could see a vast majority of people not wanting to be interviewed, whether it be on or off camera, even if it's like on mic. Like, it's like, I just would not want to be involved. So like, how do you moderate something like this? And when does it come to the lens of like, how useful is it if people don't want to do it? And how many people would want to do this, right? I have been setting you up this whole time just so I can put this. I'm not going to elaborate further. A lot of people Actually, I'm going to elaborate further. A lot of people run these to a loss. I know a lot of people, there's like a meme about like, oh, TO's making all these money. But a lot of TOs run things at a loss, as is, just out of passion, or like, you know, it just costs them a lot of money. Essentially, this is a lot more, like on a consistent basis. When we're talking about like weeklies, I mean, shit, this is like, that adds up. Like, I would love a lot of this, right? Like, I think he's absolutely correct. I think incorporating this is fantastic and smart. The problem is money. It's like when you get into this area, you're gonna start needing like serious companies. I mean, this time I am biased, but I'm glad CLG is into it, and I'm glad that like I can help out on that. Like, expecting it out of like the average person who, like, I mean, most TOs do this at a significant loss. So adding more to it, I think, would only be a detriment. And also, like, I think it would just make people feel upset. Again, like, you have to compare it, like, when we're talking like 16 people on a Thursday compared to 160 or like whatever. I mean, that's when we're starting to mean like, well, how long is this going to start running up the bracket, right? Like, how long is this going to start running up these things? When does it start becoming like their time for the event, time for matches becomes a problem? And the problem is, if you incorporated this, what would you need to incorporate to combat it? Sponsors. I only did this and only made this discussion because I think it's easy as a player to always be like I'd love this, like they should just do it. Well, it's like, well, there's a reason why they haven't before, right? So it's like, when you view it from the lens of engagement and numbers, it's harder to balance. And it's also a matter of like, you know, when we're getting into business like this as well, and I know this is scary to a lot of players that don't pay attention to the tournament stuff. Time allocated and like the money returned, a lot of the time they don't even make their money back. You're doing it out of passion. I don't know. I have a lot of respect for TOs. I think a lot of people do not respect them nearly as much as they deserve. I think it's very much so, like, especially modern days, TOs just kind of get the shit of like this idiot, dumb diaper baby doesn't know how to see it, and that's basically as far as it goes. If it comes down to just like a massive row of volunteers every time to compensate, then I mean, you're already in trouble when it comes to like, it may not be bad immediately, but it's like maybe for like a test run, I guess it could work. But I mean, no matter what, you're going to be racking up production fees, because it's like, I mean, either you're going to be giving a lot more work to one person, or you're going to be spreading it out around a lot of people. Either you're absolutely taking advantage of the one dude who's down to do it, or like basically you're running everything and losing your sanity. Again, you have to remember, from the case of online tournaments, the only ones I can really see doing this consistently is something with a major company backing it. But like, you cannot expect that from like Tommy streaming out of his bedroom, right? Like, that's way too much. You could try being ambitious with like a few things, but you have to remember that no matter what, everything you add is still going to be money. I don't know. I think there are good ways to do it. There are interesting ways to do it, but I think like when people think interviews, they're like, this person just won or lost, get them on. If they want to do interviews, it could be good, right? Depending on the person. Again, a little less. There you go. It's like, for someone who doesn't stream as much, interviews could be great. But if you have someone who does stream a lot, well, it's like, you probably asked all your questions already in their chat, right? So it's like, I mean, you can do this to give a platform and give more personality. I think that's great. Giving more personality and stuff to your players is great. I think that would be good as a way of like kind of making some stand out. I think that's kind of one of the end game ideas that works out for this. However, the problem is that when you really, I think, like look down into it and how much time and money and things like that is, it's either like, for the scale of online tournaments, I think it's too much. He is correct in some ways. I think like the emphasis he put on like specific things and like, and the value of them, I think it's worth thinking about. The thing is, it's very like top player problems. That's honestly kind of what it feels like to me. A lot of these things would not apply to Hotashi, right? Like, Hotashi could obviously do an interview fine, but I think like the thing about tournaments is they, especially for a game like Strive, having a good open varying levels of like tournaments on different days, skill levels, different type of players prefer it to others, right? Like, whatever. I don't think there's any real disadvantage. Of course, like implementing like 1 or 2 tournaments with these sort of things is not a bad thing either. Problem is that I currently could not see it as sustainable. This alone is going to be the stopping point. And it's not because they don't want to, or they don't think like the tournament wouldn't benefit from it, or it's like more like, you know, it's just a lot of money, and a lot of people are doing it out of passion and they're doing it at a loss. Hotashi, I think, came off a little aggressive. I don't think he was really trying to attack. I think it's easy to forget a lot of this stuff because like we don't see it a lot on the player base, right? We see it more from the lens of just like, you know, we're looking out for our own experience.